Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Conversations with Taz. Once again, if you're new here, every so often I get a cyst, unfortunately, on my face. That's all that's going on. No need to be concerned, no need to tussle. But happy Black History Month to all, and we're going to kick it off with some little known facts. But first, we do have to get into some current events and some news. And a lot of this news does have to do with the Black community. So let's get into the first clip.
Through, George. Baby, we just found out. Yeah, now y'all know I did a video earlier about the plea deal that the DOJ was trying to do for the McMichelsons after murdering Ahmaud Arbery, offering them a plea deal for the hate crime they were charged on the federal level. And I couldn't understand why you would actually offer them this plea deal when they've already been convicted of the murder, so it wasn't a hard sell to convict them of the hate crime. Well, the judge had came through and rejected the plea deal. Come on, judge, that's what we need to see. We need to see y'all to go ahead and go to trial to be tried for the hate crime that I'm going to say I believe you committed. I understand everybody is innocent until proven guilty, but I'm going to say I believe what I witnessed was also a hate crime in that murder. So thank you, Judge. Now we can proceed with the court case, and the jury can decide whether it was a hate crime or not.
It is amazing that all throughout history, there's always someone trying to protect white people from the consequences of their actions. But we have some more updates. Let's get into them.
So an update on the Lauren Smithfield's case. As of today, the two detectives that were also in charge of Lauren Smithfield's and Brenda Rawls' case have been immediately suspended and put on leave. There are two new detectives working on both of their cases being ruled as a criminal investigation.
I know some people are saying that it's a matter of incompetence. It's not incompetence. They know how to do their jobs. They chose not to do their jobs. Because if it would have been two white women murdered on the same day, in the same city, under suspicious circumstances, there would have been a task force already. They would have already have asked the federal government to step in and assist. No one would have been called a good person and allowed to just leave. Everything at the scene would have been tested and collected. The families would have been duly notified expeditiously. But once again, to quote the magnificent Cicely Tyson, Black women are the underrungs of society, and they remind us each and every day. Also today, unfortunately, there was yet another school shooting, and this is what we know so far.
So whenever you're ready to start. Okay. First and foremost, this is a tragic day in the city of Richfield. Our community, our hearts, our prayers, our thoughts go out to District 287, their students, their families, and their community. On February 1st, 2022, at 12:07 p.m., we had a shooting that occurred at the South Education Center at 7415 Penn Avenue South here in the city of Richfield. Officers arrived and discovered two students have been shot on the sidewalk outside of the school. Officers quickly determined that the suspects had fled the scene immediately after the shooting took place. Both injured students were transported to Hennepin County Medical Center via ambulance. As a precautionary measure, area schools were placed on lockdown. Officers conducted a search of the school and surrounding area and determined that no further threat existed. Lockdowns of area schools have since been lifted within the area. Unfortunately, one of the students succumbed to his injuries. The other student remains in critical condition at this time. The incident remains under active investigation, and law enforcement is searching for the suspects. We strongly encourage anyone with information regarding this incident to call the tip line at 1-888-ATF TIPS TIPS or 1-800-CALL-FBI. Again, our hearts are with the families, students, and the community impacted by this horrendous and tragic event. At this time, I will not be taking any questions due to it being an active investigation. I want to thank all federal law enforcement agencies, state law enforcement.
Sir, you are fine. You are. As of 2 hours ago, it was unclear if it was one assailant or multiple. And the school shooting happened in a suburb. And the quote from the New York Times says, it was not immediately clear what had precipitated the shooting or whether the students had been targeted. The victims, whose names had not been released by Tuesday evening, were found on the sidewalk, the police said. As a precaution, several other schools in the area were placed under lockdown that was later lifted. United States, we have to do better. You're willing to protest outside of abortion clinics. And abortion clinics or clinics that provide abortions do way more than just that for the community. And for a lot of women and children, that is their only means of any type of health care. And you make them feel ashamed to go in there because you presume why people are going in there. But then you demonize single mothers. You will protest children wearing a mask to school during a global pandemic. But you are okay with children having active shooter drills and children losing their lives for education. Because if someone would have told me when I was younger, I would live in a time where children were dying at school, I would have argued them to the grave. Because the United States is supposed to be the greatest country on this planet. But it truly showed that it does not give a damn about you if you are not a cisgendered white Christian male, specifically Protestant. But also today, as if 2022 hasn't been off to a fuck this planet start. According to People magazine, New Jersey's weather predicting groundhog Milltown Mel dies days before Groundhog Day 2022. Sir, come here and sit down. Before we get into the Black History facts, let's have a little something to lighten some things up and show you just a little bit of some melanated magic.
I'm a motherfucking earthquake.
Groundbreaking, I make the earth shake. Spill the Henny on the watch, time wasted. After home runs and it's back to the basics. Who you talking to? Tighten up like the braces. A wrist tripping, like you never tied laces. They change faces when they want to change places. It's bittersweet, but that kinda let me know I made it.
That was nice. And We're going to kick off our little known Black history facts segment right after this last clip of this wonderful woman going through a museum and pointing out a mistake because she was there in real life. A lot of these things did not happen as far back as you think that they did. A lot of the people that you learned about in history books or saw their pictures are still alive. But let's take a look.
What do they need to fix?
They need to fix that where it says Baltimore, Maryland. It is Arlington, Virginia, with me at the counter. Yeah, they got that all mixed up. And after we got Northern Virginia eateries desegregated, then we thought, oh, let's go to the beach for our next thing, because the Atlantic Ocean is segregated, but that was too far to commute every day and still to make it to classes in summer school. So we took on Reneco Amusement Park, and being white, I could go in and buy the tickets. You had to have a ticket every time you got on a ride, and I could go in and buy the tickets and walk back out and just hand them out to the Howard students who could dash in and hop on the merry-go-round, ticket in hand, and get themselves arrested. You got to use what you got. I was white, I could use that white complexion.
Now that is an accomplice. That is an ally. Now, how many of you all know that there were 104 Black doctors that volunteered their services during World War I? And 8 of that 104 went to take care of soldiers in France. Just 8. And 1 received a Distinguished Medal. But if you want to know about all of them collectively and that particular gentleman, the Tastic Tuesday podcast is the video just before this. But I do want to read you this. Black physician who served in World War I was mover, shaker. Dr. Hosea J. Nichols was one of 104 doctors of African American descent who were physicians in World War I. His father, William Nichols, who had been born a slave, served with the Union Army in the 59th U.S. Colored Infantry during the Civil War. Hosea was born in 1870, and he has six siblings. He and his 6 siblings were raised in Sardis, Mississippi. Nichols attended an American Missionary Association school organized for freedmen in Memphis, Tennessee, where he trained as a teacher. He taught for 2 years before enrolling in medical school. He graduated from Howard University Medical College in Washington, D.C. in 1899. After graduation, Dr. Nichols moved to Quincy and opened a practice at 234 North 6th Street. He married Ann M. Davis, who was a trained nurse, in 1901. They lived at 819 North 8th Street, where they raised 3 daughters. Although Dr. Nichols only lived in Quincy about 20 years, he was involved in many organizations and for a time was the only African American physician in Quincy. Whenever a spokesman or committee was needed, Dr. Nichols' name was included. The Black community objected to the proposed location of Lincoln School in 1908. Dr. Nichols and 2 other gentlemen presented a petition to the school board saying, "We consider it a menace to our welfare as a people to have our children educated in the vicinity of Adams Row, which is the dwelling place of all manner of vice and crime, and which is the Rock of Gibraltar to police station." The Lincoln School opened in 1910 at its new location at 10th and Spring Streets. Later, Nichols led a committee to talk to the school board about its decision to place all black children in Lincoln School, regardless of where they lived in the city. They said, "We have always had confidence in the Honorable School Board, believing that they were men above race prejudice. Unfortunately, the people of Quincy were not above race prejudice, and the decision did not change." When the Quincy chapter of the NAACP was organized in 1912, Dr. Nichols was elected president. He served in the post until the war intervened in 1917. At the age of 47, he volunteered for military service, taking the exam for the Medical Officers Reserve Corps in July. He received his commission at first lieutenant in August and was sent to Fort Des Moines, Iowa in September. Fort Des Moines had been a cavalry training post, but was converted to train African American officers when the United States entered World War I. Dr. Nichols had 42 days of military training before he was sent to Camp Funston at Fort Riley, Kansas. At Fort Riley, he was assigned to the 366th Field Hospital of the 92nd Division, 317th Sanitary Train. The 92nd Division was organized at Camp Funston in October 1917 and was an African American division. The 317 Sanitary Train was assigned to the 92nd and consisted of 4 field hospitals, 4 ambulance companies, each with 12 ambulances and a medical supply unit. The Buffalo Soldier Division was its nickname. It was sent overseas in July 1918, but by then, Dr. Nichols had left the service. In February 1918, he was granted leave to go to his elderly mother who still lived in Mississippi. She was seriously ill. On his way south, he passed through Quincy, where local newspapers chronicled his trip. He returned to Funston to work in the infirmary of the 317th Sanitary Train, but resigned his commission about a month later. Dr. Nichols explained his decision to resign from the military after only 6 months in a letter to the editor of the Daily Whig, saying, "I find that conditions which need my attention at home are so pressing as to force me to surrender my most honored commission as First Lieutenant MRC of the Army of the United States." He said his mother was hopeless and confirmed invalid, and decided that he who serves his country best is he who takes care of his family. In a letter to the president, he promised to do all I can for the cause of democracy. He goes on to address his fellow citizens of Quincy. "Here I wish to say to men of my race in particular, not to lose any time, effort, or opportunity to assist our country in her hour of greatest peril. Our grievances may be many, but this is not a time to nurture petty or personal spite." Racism isn't petty or personal, but I digress. Upon returning to Quincy, Nichols again engaged in civic activities. He was on the executive committee to plan a parade and activities in Washington Park for 55 African American draftees from Quincy. He gave the farewell address. The August 2nd parade consisted of the draftees, the chauffeurs band, the Red Cross unit, the War Relief Club, and the Married Ladies Drill Team, among others. And this is just the tip of the iceberg as to why we say melanated magic. But that's not the only one I have for y'all. Have you ever heard of Minnie M. Cox, 1869 to 1933? Minnie M. Cox, the first Black female postmaster, was born in 1869 in Lexington, Mississippi, to former slaves William and Mary Gettings. After attending school in Lexington and Indianola, Mississippi, Gettings graduated from Fisk University at the age of 19. After graduation, she married Wayne W. Cox, who was principal of the Indianola Colored School and the city's first Black alderman in 1888. The couple was politically active in the Republican Party, and as a consequence, President Benjamin Harrison appointed Cox postmaster in that city in 1891. As postmaster, Cox had a large salary of $1,100 a year, and her position carried the prestige of a presidential appointment. She was the first postmaster in that community to have a telephone installed in her office at her own expense so that local people could call to check if they had mail. In 1892, President Grover Cleveland, a Democrat, chose Mrs. D.J. Treadwell, a white woman, to replace Cox. On May 22, 1897, however, Cox was reappointed to the post by President William McKinley and then appointed for another term by President Theodore Roosevelt. Despite her long tenure as postmaster, many local whites were angry that a Black woman held the post. The white citizens of the city wanted to eliminate African Americans from all political positions, and they particularly wanted Cox removed as postmaster. In the fall of 1902, James K. Vardaman, the white supremacist editor of the Greenwood Commonwealth, made Cox's tenure as postmaster a political issue. Even before he was elected governor of Mississippi in 1904. Ooh, excuse me. Ooh, excuse me. Pardon me. In 1904, he demanded that President Roosevelt fire Cox. Roosevelt refused. Meanwhile, the white townspeople of the city held meetings calling on Cox to resign. On January 1st, excuse me, 1903, a full year before her commission as postmaster ended, she refused to step down prior to the end of her term, but she made it known that she would not be a candidate for reappointment. The situation grew tenser as local people began to threaten her and her family with violence. In response, Postal Inspector Charles Fitzgerald urged that Cox be protected by federal troops as she continued to discharge her duties. President Theodore Roosevelt refused to send troops, but he also refused to accept Cox's resignation before her term ended. Of course he did. Instead, the president closed the post office on January 2nd, 1903, and declared it would remain closed until the white citizens of the city accepted Cox as its postmaster. They did not, and the post office remained closed until Cox's term expired on January 1st, 1904. President Roosevelt appointed William Martin, a friend of Cox, as the new postmaster. Meanwhile, Cox and her husband fled the city on January 5th, 1903 for their own safety. They returned in 1904, and Minnie and Wayne Cox founded the Delta Penny Savings Bank, which attracted both black and white investors and depositors. The bank continued for 24 years until it failed on January 7th, 1928. When her first husband died in 1925, Cox remarried and moved to Memphis, Tennessee, and later to Rockford, Illinois, with her second husband, George Key Hamilton. Minnie Cox died in 1933. But yet, racists always want to say that we're mediocre, we have no education, and we don't want to work, and we can't work, and all of these things. Is it that we can't work, or you don't want us to work? You don't allow us to work and flourish? Because when Mrs. Cox came back to the city and opened a savings and loan, white people were okay with that. White people needed a place to put their money. And it's looking like white people were trusting other white people at that time. But I digress. Now, have you ever heard of the National Equal Rights League? NERL. Well, it was in existence from 1864 to 1921. Founded in Syracuse, New York in 1864, the National Equal Rights League, NERL, promoted full and immediate citizenship for African Americans. Created during the Civil War, the League based its call for full citizenship as compensation for military service in the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. They argued that the sacrifices of African Americans on the battlefield entitled all black males to the ballot and all black men and women to full citizenship. Makes sense to me. The founders of NERL included Henry Highland Garnett, Frederick Douglass, and John Mercer Langston, among other prominent leaders. Although it began in New York, it quickly spread throughout the country immediately after the Civil War. Active branches grew in Louisiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Ohio, Missouri, and especially North Carolina. The NERL quickly became associated with Republican politics at the local and national level. Although African American men were little more than 2% of the northern population in 1870, they nonetheless worked towards full civil rights. In 1866, for example, the Pennsylvania League successfully brought lawsuits to end streetcar segregation. Their success led to similar NERL-inspired legal actions in other northern states. The League also recognized the importance of education in guaranteeing equal rights. At the first annual meeting of NERL in 1865 in Cleveland, Ohio, League leaders called for integrated school education, but they were careful to note that such integration should not result in discrimination against African American teachers. NERL found little support for school integration even during the Reconstruction period in the South or the North. The Pennsylvania League, for example, petitioned the state's legislature annually and unsuccessfully from 1876 to 1880 to integrate schools. By the beginning of the 20th century, 1900 to 1930, just so you have a reference point, the League nearly disintegrated But in 1908, William Monroe Trotter revived interest by promoting Neural as an important vehicle for pursuing equal rights through the courts, arguing that these institutions were more sympathetic to Black rights than federal or state governments. During the first decade of the 20th century, W.E.B. Du Bois, now a prominent leader of the League, attempted unsuccessfully to convince Neural members to include white Americans into the organization. When he failed, he joined the newly organized NAACP. Of course, Du Bois stays a bane of my existence. And I'm telling you, if I ever get a chance at time travel, it is on site. Between his talented 10th, his colorism, his misogyny, his ego, and this "we must be led by white people" bullshtickety, I can't. I can't. And I understand some people highly respect him and love him. No. But let's continue. The League also debated women's suffrage. Octavius Cotto, Robert Purvis, and Alicia Weaver all favored women's political equality. The majority of League members, however, feared that pressing for women's suffrage would weaken the campaign to restore Black male voting rights in the South. While women, excuse me, While women were members of the League's auxiliaries from its early years, it was only in the first decade of the 20th century that Neural moved toward advocating gender as well as racial equality. 50 years after its founding, Ida B. Wells, journalist and anti-lynching activist, became vice president of the League. Wells, a founding member of the NAACP, left that organization for Neural. During World War I, the League called on the U.S. Congress to make lynching a federal crime. Yes, this is how long we have been wanting lynching to be looked at as a hate crime and a federal crime with federal consequences. They refuse to hear us because I think it's their favorite pastime, just like picnics. By 1919, Neural pushed to add to Woodrow Wilson's 14 points a 15-point, which called for the worldwide elimination of civil, political, and judicial distinctions based on race and color. However, as the NAACP grew in prominence, support for Neural declined. By 1921, most of the League members had joined the NAACP. Yeah. Most people know about SNCC, the NAACP, the Rainbow, things like that, but I don't think people realize, even to this day, how many boots on the ground grassroots organizations that there are out here fighting for equity, for change, for civil rights to this day. This is also why I have an issue when they just say the civil rights era. That is the beginning. It didn't end. We are still going through it. We still don't have equity. We still have a forward cause. We still have forward motion to go. But I'm going to be completely transparent and honest with you. There is still, to this day, a lot of colorism dividing, a lot of ego dividing, a lot of misogyny, external and internal, that is eating away. And too many people are trying to monetize the movement instead of just doing the work. Nobody said you were going to get rich fighting to stay alive. Just said you would be able to stay alive. Or, maybe I missed that meeting. But regarding Wilson's 14 points, and just a side note, Teddy Roosevelt did do a lot of sticking up for Black postal workers, but that's it. He enacted zero civil rights legislation. He did zero to help anyone. He actually did more harm than good. McKinley had his moments. He had his moments, but they were moments. Hold on. Okay, here we go. The 14 points. Because, like we heard, Neural wanted to add a 15th point. But here are the 14 points from Woodrow Wilson's address to Congress and regarding the Treaty of Versailles when he went to Paris. And these are the 14 points in order. Open diplomacy without secret treaties, economic free trade on the seas during war and peace, equal trade conditions, decrease armaments among all nations, address colonial claims, evacuation of all Central Powers from Russia and allow it to define its own independence. That was a mistake. Belgium to be evacuated and restored. Sir, there is nothing wrong with you. I'm still sitting here. You're spoiled. Return of Alsace-Lorraine region to all French territories. Readjust Italian borders, Austria-Hungary to be provided an opportunity for self-determination. Redraw the borders of the Balkan region, creating Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. Creation of a Turkish state with guaranteed free trade in the Dardanelles. Creation of an independent Polish state and creation of the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations did exist, and it basically was the blueprint for what we now know as the United Nations. Yeah. But Woodrow Wilson, after compromising during the Treaty of Versailles, when he came back, he did not want to compromise with Congress, who was still afraid of the UK at this point. He suffered a debilitating stroke, so they never agreed upon and never signed into the treaty. So, yeah. And then, here we go. And we have one more wonderful fun fact. The Brownsville Affair took place in 1906. It's a racial incident that grew out of tensions between whites in Brownsville, Texas, and black infantrymen stationed nearby at Fort Brown. At midnight between August 13th and August 14th, 1906, rifle shots were made on a street in Brownsville, which killed one white man and wounded another. Once again, white people will take out their own to perpetuate their racism. They will take out their whole family and claim that it was a black person, specifically a black man. Hell, we've seen in our lifetime white men and women off their own families and claim that it was black people. But I digress. White commanders at the fort asserted that they had seen black soldiers on the street committing such crime. But it was discovered that it was white soldiers that went out firing indiscriminately and produced spent shell casings from army rifles to support their statements. Despite the evidence that the shells had been planted as part of a frame-up, investigators accepted the statements of the mayor and the white citizens. When the black soldiers insisted that they had no knowledge of this shooting, President Theodore Roosevelt ordered 167 black infantrymen discharged without honor because of their conspiracy of silence. You know, your right to plead the fifth, especially when you don't know what's going on and you don't want to be tripped up like the cops, as we've seen historically happen to so many black people, specifically black men and black young men and boys. But his action caused much resentment among black people and drew some criticism from white people. But a U.S. Senate committee, which investigated the episode from 1907 to 1908, upheld Roosevelt's action. The Brownsville affair has ever since been a matter of controversy with the rise of the civil rights movement, and it became a matter of embarrassment to the Army. After the publication in 1970 of John Downing Weaver's The Brownsville Raid, which argued that the discharged soldiers had been innocent, the Army conducted a new investigation in 1972 and reversed the order of 1906. I share this last story because so often we get into debates online, debates in person, debates in class, debates at work with white people who think that they are anti-racist and they are not. And they always want to bring up statistics. And when we say statistics are skewed, they're skewed in your favor. That is a component of your white privilege. They're like, but no, and historically, y'all lie. You still lie to this day. You realize that Black people are the blueprint. Hence the fact that you imitate and mimic and mock and have these present day minstrel show personalities and racially ambiguous bodies and skin tones. This is how we ended up with the Rachel Dolezal. She would rather cosplay Black than just be who she is. If you are so superior, why can't y'all just be you? Why can't you just create what you need to be created or you desire to be created? You want to make everything a status symbol. Everything except for doing better and educating yourself. That's why you think critical race theory is going to make little Johnny and Susie feel bad. No, it's going to make little Johnny and Susie a better person, and it's going to cause them to realize that you're a racist piece of shit. But it is what it is. And if you want more nuggets like this and more in-depth conversations regarding Black history, please join me on Saturdays at noon. Link is in the bio, as it says right here, for learning through Black literature. Like I said, like I've said previous times, you don't necessarily have to have the book because I give a lot of historical context and background so that you can understand better events that we do discuss in the book, events that did take place, so you can see what's going on simultaneously. But I hope this Black History Month you learned something, whether from me, from someone else, or from your own research. And do better to be better. And as always, each one teach one, each one reach one. I hope you have an amazing night. And you reach someone at some point.